Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: two House committees condemning Harvard for its recent probation decision. The school decided to punish several student protesters who spoke out against China's human rights violation on their own campus, but not the man who shoved one of them during the incident. Another American law firm shrinking its China operations. What's driving the major law firm exodus from the country? Days after a round of Chinese war games encircled Taiwan, the U.S. and Canada are sending warships through the Taiwan Strait. How Beijing responds. And a potential thaw in a 4-year military standoff, India and China have penned a new deal to patrol their contentious frontier. Harvard is placing 3 of its students on disciplinary probation after a protest incident, but has taken no action against the man who attacked a protester. It all started when a group of students raised China's human rights abuses during a speech at Harvard by the Chinese ambassador in early April. The punishment decision has led to scrutiny from lawmakers over the school's China stance. The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party condemned the school and called on the U.S. higher education system to wake up to the CCP's influence. In the wake of far-reaching accusations against China, including genocide and forced live organ harvesting, critics raised the question of why the school invited China's ambassador to speak in the first place. Chairman of the House China Committee, Congressman John Mulinar, issued a statement last Friday. He said, quote, "Harvard is punishing brave students who spoke out against the CCP's human rights abuses, while not only letting the student who assaulted them off scot-free, but also handing him an apology." That's referring to a Chinese man who dragged and pushed a Taiwanese American student out of the hall during the protest.
You've come to paint the illusion of a prosperous China, but your hands are painted with blood.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik vowed to assist the two committees in holding Harvard accountable and ending Communist China's infiltration of U.S. campuses. The House China Committee said the man who dragged the protester had no authority to serve as security. Under Massachusetts law, evidence against him could lead to assault charges, a state felony. We'll keep you updated as the situation develops. A New York big law is scaling down its China operation. Law firm Skadden said last Friday it's shuttering its Shanghai office. In a statement, the firm said shifting market dynamics have led to the decision, adding it would keep its offices in Hong Kong and Beijing. It's unclear how many staffers would be affected by the layoff. This comes after a number of U.S. law firms having decided to shrink their China presence, closing offices either in Beijing or Shanghai. The exodus comes as China's economy continues to struggle. Consumer purchases are hitting new lows, the property market remains sluggish, and spending is weak. China's central bank said Monday that it would cut interest rates to boost economic recovery. The U.S. and Canada sailing their Navy ships through the Taiwan Strait over the weekend. The voyage was an apparent message to the Chinese regime, which held war games near Taiwan last week.
The U.S. 7th Fleet said the transit was a routine move in accordance with international law and noted the ship passed through waters that are not part of any country's territory. It added that the move showed the U.S. and Canada's commitments to upholding freedom of navigation. China today protested the transit, accusing the U.S. and Canada of disrupting peace in the region. Its Navy monitored the U.S. and Canadian ships during the transit. The Chinese regime sees Taiwan plus the Taiwan Strait as its own despite never having ruled the island. Taiwanese President William Lai once again rejected Beijing's claim during his National Day speech on October 10th. The speech provoked Beijing. The Chinese military sent a record number of warplanes to threaten Taiwan and conducted war games around the island.
Another plane full of Chinese nationals headed back to China last week. It's the second deportation flight the U.S. arranged this year as Washington cracks down on illegal Chinese immigrants. But what drove them here in the first place? We're joined by Bradley Thayer, founding member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China and co-author of Understanding the China Threat, for more. Bradley Thayer, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
It's my pleasure to join you again, Tiffany. Thank you.
Now, immigration is one of the top issues for voters this election cycle. And we just saw China saying on Friday that it's set to strengthen enforcement with nations such as the U.S. when it comes to smuggling and other crimes. Now, this does come as the number of Chinese migrants illegally crossing into the U.S. has gone up 15%. That's compared to before the pandemic. How do you view this phenomenon of Chinese leaving China, especially the middle class and well-to-do?
Well, there are two elements there. First, it's entirely understandable to escape the tyranny of the Chinese regime, of the Chinese Communist Party. But a second element there is that not all of those individuals who are leaving have benign intentions towards the United States. And it's quite clear that there would be MSS agents as well as PLA and other individuals from the police force, et cetera. And they're here to serve as the muscle for the Chinese Communist Party, for the dictator Xi Jinping. And that includes, of course, possibilities of election interference, possibilities of covert action against the United States, as well as a modernization of Operation Fox Hunt against Chinese dissidents, enemies of the regime here in the United States, as well as the Chinese diaspora, as well as Chinese Americans.
Obviously, China has exit bans. Now, on the U.S. side, though, reports are saying that Customs and Border Patrol has watered down the vetting process when it comes to Chinese migrants entering the country. Given that, what do you make of this? Why would the U.S. side water down this vetting process, especially when we are seeing the tensions between the U.S. and China?
Tiffany, it's supremely curious that the Biden-Harris administration allows these individuals to come in. You're right that an exit, that essentially you need permission to leave China. That certainly maybe a bribery or other mechanisms are present, but many of those individuals leaving again have nefarious intent. So why is the Biden-Harris administration letting these individuals in? It seems that they are gambling with American security, national security, to say nothing of terrorists and other bad criminals and other bad actors.
There is another section where you've actually brought up in your book, Understanding the China Threat, that Communist leader Xi Jinping has his goal of global hegemony, but also spreading communism around the world. When it comes to factors like those, how do you see those potentially feeding into this immigration issue, if you will, that we're seeing here?
Well, indeed, that this is an aspect of political warfare, the weaponization of immigration, and again, recognizing that this is Chinese muscle coming into the United States. These are individuals who are going to be conducting espionage, collecting intelligence. These are individuals who will be conducting covert action against targets in the United States. It is by design, of course, the Chinese regime is intending to do this as part of their political warfare campaign or unrestricted warfare against the United States to undermine the U.S. from within, to be able to target American facilities.
Bradley Thayer, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Tiffany. Thank you very much.
Next, a major dispute between India and China, the globe's two most populous countries. Early Monday, India's foreign secretaries of the two nations have come up with a patrolling arrangement along their disputed border.
The Indian Foreign Secretary said the patrolling agreement comes as a result of several rounds of talks between the two countries' diplomats and negotiators over the past few weeks. The pact is expected to calm down the two troops near the border and lead to disengagement, in the top diplomat's words. The border in the Himalayas saw a skirmish between Indian and Chinese troops back in 2020. At least 24 of Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers died in that confrontation.
Now, as a result of the discussions that have taken place over the last several weeks, an agreement has been arrived at on patrolling arrangements along the line of actual control in the India-China border areas. And this is leading to disengagement and eventually a resolution of the issues that had arisen in these areas in 2020.
China and India are both nuclear-armed countries. The 2020 border disputes have strained their ties. The news comes ahead of Indian Prime Minister Modi's trip to Russia, where he will meet with the head of Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. BRICS is a regional summit that's mainly combined by Russia, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, some of the biggest developing countries in the world.
Coming up, the UK's new government looking to reset relations with Beijing. Its foreign minister emphasized consistency during his visit to China. More tariffs against Chinese-made electric cars are up for debate, and the U.S. is giving the green light. But one of America's major allies in Europe says no. And a human rights lawyer showcases his life's work bringing justice to victims of human rights violations around the world, especially those facing persecution and forced organ harvesting in China.
Somebody from the Chinese police called him and asked me this question: what you're doing is putting your life at risk. Are you not afraid?
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. America's closest ally appearing to hit the reset button on its relationship with China. Britain's new foreign secretary pledging consistency during his China visit last week.
Of course, there are areas of national security interests, and we will always put those first. But what people also want is consistency. What business wants is stability and clarity, and that's what the UK government, led by Keir Starmer, promises over this next period.
Lammy met with his Chinese counterpart and one of the country's vice premiers. Beijing described the new UK government's China approach as a new starting point. China is Britain's sixth largest trading partner, and the UK has zigzagged in its bilateral ties with Beijing. It has gone from the so-called golden era of China relations to becoming a fierce critic of Beijing in recent years. But this is shifting under the new Labour government. Lammy discussed China's human rights issues as well as Beijing's support for Russia, though he noted there is scope for cooperation in areas like climate, energy, trade, and science. Britain's previous government clashed with China over human rights, Hong Kong, and allegations of Chinese espionage. The new government has appeared to backtrack from a pledge to declare the Chinese regime's treatment of the Uyghur minority group genocide, instead leaving it to international courts to decide. Meanwhile, China faces worsening relations with the European Union over various trade defense measures, as well as fractious ties with the United States. Lammy is in South Korea on Monday. Its foreign minister called for more deeper security cooperation. This after nuclear-armed North Korea launched a series of missile tests. The U.S. is upping tariffs against Chinese-made electric cars, but one of America's major allies in Europe is against it. Here's what German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said on Monday.
As an export nation, we rely on open trade with the entire world. And that's why we don't need the best tariffs, but rather the best cars and the most advanced technology. Of course, we need a level playing field, fair competition conditions. That's what we're talking about. The EU is also rightly discussing this with Beijing. But the vast majority of cars produced in China that come here to Germany are from German and international brands.
Germany is one of the few EU countries that recently voted against a new tariff surcharge on Chinese-made EVs. The surcharge could reach up to 35% and will be added on top of the standard 10% tariff that's already in place. BMW is hitting a roadblock in China. The German car maker is recalling almost 700,000 cars over potential fire safety risks. Chinese authorities said defects in coolant pumps could cause short circuits or fires. The recall affects some models made in China, including the 3 Series and 5 Series, though the same models made in Europe are not affected. China is BMW's biggest market, but the luxury brand is struggling in the country. Demand has been dropping and competitions are on the rise. Both BMW and Mercedes saw their third quarter sales in China plunge. For BMW, a 30% drop, while Mercedes sales fell 13%. For decades, one man has dedicated his life to fighting for human rights. From Holocaust survivors to the forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong. Human rights lawyer and Nobel Peace Prize nominee David Matas is hunting for justice. Crowds gathered over the weekend in Toronto, Canada to honor his efforts. Let's take a look.
Somebody from the Chinese police called him and asked me this question: what you're doing is putting your life at risk. Are you not afraid?
Recognizing what David has done in many, many fields. And we can never do that enough to thank the people who take a risk and are prepared to go where others won't.
The Justice Hunter, a moniker worn well by David Matas, a Canadian lawyer with a private practice in refugee immigration and human rights law since 1979.
He's an exceptional human being and human rights lawyer, and his commitment to human rights is just endless.
Early in his career, David was dedicated to the tribulations of the Holocaust survivors. His grandparents were Jewish immigrants from the Ukraine and Romania that escaped persecution in the early 20th century.
I got started basically with dealing with the issue of bringing Nazi war criminals to justice, which I started in the 1970s. And I also got started with doing refugee work, where the victims, of course, the refugees were victims of human rights violations.
And he was passionate about the cause of Holocaust survivors and the cause of Holocaust, the people that suffered from the Holocaust, and all the people that were led into this country, as you saw in the film.
In 2010, Mr. Matas and former Edmonton Member of Parliament David Kilgour were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for 4 years of investigative work into organ harvesting practices in China. In addition to the 2 reports they published, Kilgour and Matas co-authored Bloody Harvest, the killing of Falun Gong for their organs. The book details evidence that tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners had been killed by the Chinese regime in the process of stealing their organs for transplant surgeries.
It all started back in 2005 when a patient of mine who's been on the top list for heart transplantation in Israel approached me and told me, "Doc, my insurance company told me to travel to China and they have scheduled heart transplantation for me in 2 weeks' time." And I looked at him and asked him, "Do you listen to yourself? How can anyone promise you a heart transplantation ahead of time? You know that for heart transplantation, somebody has to die on the very same day, and there's no way to schedule such an operation ahead of time." He told me, "I don't know. That's what my insurance company told me." And sure enough, the patient went to China and got his heart transplantation exactly on the day promised.
Nobody wanted to believe a country could kill their citizens. Nobody wanted to believe something like the Holocaust could happen today. And they didn't want to hear about it. And they didn't want to take the chance of reporting it. Very similar to the Holocaust. Same rationale. And the Chinese government had tried to dehumanize people that would allow them to do this kind of dastardly activity.
David Kilgour was a longtime friend of Matas from years before they ever worked together on their report.
They had met at the University of Manitoba when they were in their late teens.
Well, I mean, it was David Kilgour got me involved because he was really instrumental in getting me involved. And then it turned out we were a very good team.
Over the weekend, an event was held in Toronto, Ontario, to honor his work in helping Falun Gong practitioners, the Uyghurs, and the Tamil groups, among so many more. A documentary film, The Justice Hunter, was played for a packed theater of people, showing their support and gratitude for David's work.
It's a serious film dealing with serious topics, and the work of someone who's devoted his entire life to important causes. And I don't think he's finished by any means.
After they wrote the report, they started to travel, and they had events in maybe 55 different countries over the next 2 or 3 years. And my husband died 2 years ago, and the week that he died, I started receiving emails from the Falun Gong communities around the world. And they started telling me from Finland, from Israel, from Japan, from Australia.
Standing up for injustice, however, isn't without risk.
I mean, there was a drive-by shooting in Australia of the Epoch Times office immediately before they were hosting an event. If you don't like what I'm saying, don't threaten me. Stop organ transplant abuse in China.
Despite the risk, Matas believes we should all try to raise awareness in whatever way we can.
The reality is that in my career, when it comes to justice, hunting for mass atrocities, so far, I have seen a movement only in inches. I intend to keep on going, but I look to you in the audience and others who believe in justice to complete the journey. We need people in whatever they're doing, whether it's law or stitching pandas or serving food or pursuing justice in order for justice to prevail.
NTD News, Toronto, Canada.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Coming up on NTD, stay tuned for America's Hope with Kelly Wright. In tonight's episode, Ryan Walters, Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, shares details about his efforts to improve education in his state, highlighting universal school choice and introducing Bible curriculum. Plus, Jameson Taylor talks to Kelly about the pro-life versus pro-choice debate, highlighting Kamala Harris's stance on abortion and Donald Trump's pro-life policies. That's tonight at 10 p.m. after China in Focus. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.